So let's be clear here. Donald Trump doing this has broken the law.
Yes, Congress passed a very clear and unambiguous law, requiring TikTok either or ByteDance, to divest from TikTok or to be shut down in the U.S. and for any companies who are providing services to TikTok to effectively also be shut down. And there were some conditions that would have allowed for an extension of that ban, but they have not been met. Nobody seriously contends that they've been met. And Trump's executive order effectively just changed his view of the law.
Is it just me, or does Congress and the Supreme Court not have much point if the president can simply ignore them?
Well, look, that is a major problem here. I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago that the Supreme Court unanimously affirmed the constitutionality of this law. And yes, you are right. I mean, these sorts of moves, which are consistent with other moves that the Trump administration has already made in its first couple of weeks surrounding appropriations and that sort of thing, it does raise very serious questions about our constitutional order. Congress is supposed to appropriate funds in our constitutional system, and the executive branch is supposed to execute those laws. And it does change the balance of power in a very significant way if the president can just say, I'm going to ignore that law.
I want to remind our viewers about what Republican Senator Tom Cotton said literally the day before the ban was enacted, before then being lifted again. He's obviously a China hawk and head of the Senate Intelligence Committee as well. Let's hear what he said that day.
Without question, TikTok's lethal algorithm has cost the lives of many American kids. China also uses TikTok to amplify its propaganda and suppress information critical of the communist tyranny in Beijing.
So, Ankush, what are we hearing from Cotton now, and indeed other congressmen who were so in favor of this law before?
Not much. In fact, Tom Cotton was asked about this last Sunday on Fox News, and he struck a very different tone, basically saying, well, look, the law that we passed was designed to ensure that China eventually divests, and if we eventually end up there, then that's really all that matters. And this is a very different tone than the one he struck earlier. He was obviously very certain and felt very strongly, and I do think he was sincere at that time. And my sense is that he probably, being himself a very experienced lawyer, is aware that it is going to reduce Congress's leverage in situations like this if they pass laws, they use all this rhetoric, and then the laws don't go into effect.
And it's one of the reasons that Trump is, quote unquote, getting away with this, because actually it got a bit of a green light from Joe Biden, the ban's delay, just before he came into office. The Democrats almost held up their hands and said, well, they can do what they like when Trump comes in.
Yeah, that is a very good point that I'm glad you brought up. This is a bipartisan affair in Congress. It is not just Tom Cotton, and it's not just Republicans. This law passed overwhelmingly in both houses with bipartisan support. Now, I'm setting aside the merits of the law. One can agree or disagree. The law was passed, and there's no question about that, that it's on the books. And so you're exactly right. There has been tacit approval of the situation we find ourselves in from the Democratic members of Congress as well.
Now, what we're not suggesting is that an executive order has never been found to be unlawful, right? Because we've had this with, George W. Bush in the past, for instance.
That is correct. And Barack Obama even, right? When presidents issue executive orders, they can maybe later be deemed to be unlawful. But in those sorts of instances, in those prior instances, those were executive orders about allocating sort of limited resources or delaying implementation of sort of broad brush statutes. There was no such accommodation. There was no accommodation like the one we see here, where there is an executive order that is being provided as an accommodation for a single for-profit company. That I have identified or heard nobody identify a precedent approximating what we have here. Those prior instances involve different forms of discretion. Debatable perhaps, but this is quite different.
And in terms of the companies that can really maybe stomach actually stepping up and going in for this deal overseen by Trump, is perhaps Oracle one of the more likely, because they're keeping TikTok servers online right now?
It does appear that Oracle may be one of the more promising candidates, and there has been some reporting in the U.S. about potential deal there. But there's a long way to go, right? And it's not even clear that the sort of deal with Oracle that's been reported as being under contemplation in our media would even comply with the law that Congress passed, which mandates certain divestiture conditions. So we are a long way, from what I can tell, from a sort of legally sensible and sound resolution here.
Ankush Kalduri from Politico, thanks very much for your time.